Hi friends, let's finally talk about Raidou Remastered. Better late than never, as I missed the launch date by a long time. I can just randomly schedule this review to be released during the time that I will be feverishly playing Donkey Kong Bonanza and not having time to make new content every day. And also give some variety to the listeners and watchers, so it's not just 100% Donkey Kong glazing videos in a row. Raidou is a good game, and it does deserve your attention. It certainly captured mine. It wasn't a launch game, so it wasn't covered in my previous 2-hour breakdown of all 25, but actually holds the distinction of being the first game released for Switch 2 after the launch date, releasing on the 19th of June, 2 weeks after, and over a week before the next game to release, Tamagotchi Plaza, which I've already done a full review of, as mentioned in my top 10. So there was a period of a week where this was the only new game to release, and you'd think that would be a great win for Sega, but it flew somewhat under the radar for many people. I briefly mentioned it in the previous top 10, and I said that I hadn't played it enough to give an opinion. And I also talked about it in a previous episode when talking about Sega's release strategy so far for Switch 2. I've now played the game for much more time, and while I admit I haven't completed it yet, I feel qualified to give it a semi-full review, as if I don't get round to reviewing it now, I probably never will, and I think it's an interesting game to talk about, especially as it seems to have been overlooked by many people, and I think that's a shame. Perhaps it's because many people won't know what a Raidou is. That's R-A-I-D-O-U, not ride out, as I'm aware it might sound like I'm saying if you're listening on an audio-only platform. The art style and name might lead you to believe that it's one of 1,000,001 anime games that you don't know anything about and therefore you don't pay it much attention. Well, I'm here to tell you that it might actually be worth your time. It's not an anime game, in fact, but a spin-off or side project from the Shin Megami Tensai franchise, developed by Atlus and published by Sega. For some of you, that's enough to make you interested already. It's a Japanese RPG, yes, but it's an action RPG with real-time battles and no random encounters. It's set in Tokyo in the 1920s or 30s, I think, which in itself is a pretty interesting setup. You control Raidou, aha, so it's not what is a Raidou, but who is a Raidou. Well, yes, but also what, because Raidou is a devil summoner who is a student and works undercover for a detective agency solving supernatural mysteries. Yeah, it's a pretty unique sounding blend, and given the 1920s or 30s noir-ish, gothic-ish, but untypically for those tropes also very Japanese setting, it does make for a pretty neat and unique premise. The story is very pulp mystery novel in feel, and in my opinion that's a very good thing. It's far more interesting to me than the typical JRPG tropes, and given that this is a remake of an early 2000s game, it has the cinematic fixed camera angles of the early Resident Evil games, and again, that's something I absolutely love. I very much miss the days of cinematic camera angles rather than having a generic floating third-person cameraman on a 3-axis gimbal behind your butt or looking over your shoulder. For me, that kind of aesthetic peaked with Code Veronica on Dreamcast, because it swapped the pre-rendered backgrounds of Resi 1 to 3 and instead allowed movement in the fixed cameras, so dolly shots, crane shots, pans, tilts, the occasional Steadicam move. As some of you know, I work in the film industry and have produced and directed many movies, and using purposefully chosen cinematography and motivated camera movement to tell a story rather than just generically floating behind you works so much better for games with a horror aesthetic, in my opinion. Resident Evil 4 is a game that I simultaneously love and hate. I love it for how incredible it is. It's a great game, obviously, but I hate it for how much it essentially created the new template for everything moving forward and killed the more interactive movie feel of previous games. So anyway, back to Raidou. It has a lot of promise. It's also an interesting use case to compare the Switch 1 and 2 releases and even compare with the PS2 original. There's a lot to cover then. Right after you drop a like on the video, thank you very much. Subscribe if you haven't already, thank you again. And you can even leave an algorithm boosting comment while I read the podcast intro. Have you already played Raidou? Want to mock me for being late to the party? Whatever your thoughts on this game, I'd love to hear them and tell you mine after I quickly say, hi everyone, welcome to Daily Switch 2, a podcast covering everything related to the Nintendo Switch 2, with at least one new episode or video uploaded per day to YouTube, Spotify, and your favourite major platforms. My name is Sam, and I've been a gamer since the 1980s. I've worked in the entertainment industry since I was a teenager, including as a games journalist, producer of gaming documentaries and shows, and I'm even producing multiple indie video games, including 4 which will be released on the Switch and hopefully Switch 2, so be sure to subscribe and follow the show for the world exclusive news on those as they drop. However, I'm a gamer and Nintendo fan at heart, and this podcast is purely a passion project for me to talk about the stuff that interests and excites me about this new system. It's not monetized or funded by any entity. It's completely unofficial and unbiased so that I can give my full, frank, honest opinions. So if you want to support me or just find out the best places to get these free daily episodes, or join our free members area where you can talk to me directly and leave suggestions and take part in our monthly free giveaways to win official Nintendo prizes. All links are in the bio and at linktree/dailyswitch2. That's linktr.ee/dailyswitch2. Thank you so much. And back to the episode. Raidou then is a remake of a PS2 game, as I mentioned, from exactly that era. And like the aforementioned Code Veronica, this remake takes the pre-rendered backgrounds of the original and completely replaces them with 3D environments to allow for a slightly more dynamic camera and more interactivity with lighting and shadows. No bad thing for a supernaturally themed game. Of course, this is a pulp noir detective RPG, not a survival horror, but the Japanese gothic 20s, 30s supernatural hybrid aesthetics work really well with this visual style, and its occult themes are definitely enhanced by it. In typical Shin Megami Tensai style, the demons and spirits and the like have a wide variety of visual style, shall we say, ranging from cute and cuddly looking to kind of uncomfortably sexy and half nude. If you know Shin Megami Tensai games, you will know what to expect, but the real-time combat will surprise and hopefully delight you. I first picked up the Switch 2 version and played it for about an hour, which was enough to tell me that it was an interesting game that I wanted to know more about and cover on my channel, so that's what I'm doing here. For the purposes of doing a thorough job, I also picked up the Switch 1 version to compare, and for other reasons we'll get into later. I also even checked out the PS2 original, released in 2006, fairly late for a PS2 game. That might explain why I personally had not heard of it. But seemingly it's known as a bit of a cult classic, and like many Atlus games, it's pretty expensive if you want to track down a copy nowadays. Originally called Devil Summoner Raidou vs. the Soulless Army, Raidou Remastered is a much easier title this time round. Though losing the Devil Summoner moniker is perhaps a shame, as that both gives a clear picture of what the game is about, and also is an indication for those in the know that it's part of the Devil Summoner series, one of the more well-regarded Shin Megami Tensai franchises. This is far from just an upscaled remaster or emulated port of the PS2 game. No, this is a ground-up remake. As I mentioned, it's now in full 3D. They've also got new character models, full voice acting in both English or Japanese, subs or dubs depending on your preference, always very welcome. There's fully updated and rebalanced combat too. It's clear that a lot of effort, love and respect has been put in by Atlus here. There must be people at the studio who love the original. I mentioned the setting and how a 20s, 30s pulp noirish detective game is interesting to be set in Japan, and the plot very much takes advantage of this. No spoilers in this review, don't worry, but I will say that while I've only played it for about halfway through the game, I believe, I like what I've played so far very much. It's a West meets East culture clash transition period style tale of traditional Japan becoming modernized-ish, but also very westernized. And the underlying tension present in this setup playing out beautifully and symbolically throughout the occult themes and uneasy spiritual energies manifesting in demons. Sort of like how in Buffy, the demons and vampires are a metaphor for the difficulty of that transitional period from being a kid to suddenly being plagued with hormones and adult responsibilities before you feel ready for them. Or perhaps it's more Sabrina, being that we do start off with a seemingly human-ish talking black cat who acts as your mentor. I always loved a bit of Salem Saberhagen. The story starts with Kaya, a girl who enters the detective agency and promptly asks them to kill her. Then, before she can explain, soldiers appear, fight you, and kidnap her, and she's gone, and you are left with your first mystery as the events of the story start to unfold. It's an intriguing and unusual setup, and the rate at which you are drip-fed new information about the plot is pretty well paced, and there's a wide variety of characters. No spoilers, but I love how they've reimagined Rasputin, and the plucky journalists trying to find a story is a great trope, and it is used well here. You explore the real world and the Dark Realm, which is a parallel version of the city filled with spirits and demons. There are also rifts, dimensional tears between the realms, which are optional combat zones which have a higher risk but higher XP payout. As for that combat then, it's completely redesigned over the original, as I said. There was apparently also a sequel, which I haven't played, and this remake takes the improvements from the sequel and builds even further upon them. It's worth mentioning too that while in the original you had random battles that were unavoidable and happened everywhere in the game, the encounters now happen less in the overworld and more in the more thematically darker, dangerous areas, and are often avoidable completely because you can see the demons rather than the typical stop-start of invisible random battles happening when you were just trying to run down an empty street to get somewhere. Personally, to me, this is a massive quality of life improvement and immeasurably improves the game over the original and many other Japanese RPGs of the time period or earlier. The battles themselves have a fast-paced momentum-style real-time combat using swords and guns, which can be upgraded. I think the sword alchemy feature is really fun and has a lot of potential for depth. But more important to the combat is summoning demons, and you can have 2 demons at once, unlike the original PS2 version, and these demons will fight by themselves automatically, or you can issue them with specific commands. And having 2 demons at once this time around actually adds a real strategic advantage, being able to have 2 different types of elemental attacks, for example. So you can take on different enemies with different vulnerabilities at the same time. Demons use mag to perform skills, and it doesn't regenerate. You have to use mag drain and fight to drain it from the enemies. There are limit break style build-ups that function at different levels, culminating in a screen-clearing huge attack. The battles are real-time, not turn-based, as I said, but there are elements of choosing to wait or balance your resources. It's not just pure button mashing. All in all, it's a pretty unique system that I'm sure gets really deep if you take the time to learn and master everything. I'm certainly not there yet, but fumbling my way through, it's splashy and fun, and I love the wide variety in demons. 120 of them, I believe, and SMT fans will recognize many series favorites. For me, I always love seeing the Jack Brothers. That was my second favourite game after Wario Land on Nintendo's Virtual Boy. The demons that you choose to be in your team can be leveled and even fused together with various different fusion types, and each time you fuse them, they can inherit different skills as well as just becoming stronger. I can see there being a lot of replay value in working out the best combinations, and there is a premium devil chart to summon duplicates of your favourite demons that you can register for later use. The demons on your team aren't just for combat either. They can have investigation skills. You can send them solo to different areas to help you solve mysteries. Speaking of that, being a detective story, you obviously will encounter puzzles to solve along the way. The whole thing so far is pretty ingenious, and while I haven't completed it, I've not gotten to the point where I felt stuck, but rather the puzzle elements are satisfying and make me feel smart as I play. For me, at least, it seems to be designed and balanced well. Some clues only appear in the Dark Realm or the real world, or vice versa. Some threats can pass from one to the other. It's interesting how the whole parallel worlds thing works, and again, it's a pretty unique setup. I've not played a game exactly like Raidou before. Difficulty-wise, there's quick saves, auto-saves, and you can change the difficulty setting in real-time on the fly. No need to start a new game. If things are too hard, you can always adjust to keep the story going, or if you want a more challenging game, you can ramp it up when you're feeling brave. There's a detective journal which keeps a detailed record of everything, including your current leads, progress, journey so far. You aren't likely to get stuck wandering around aimlessly, or if you come back to your game after not playing for a while, it will be easy to catch up and remember where you were. Comparing the Switch 1 and 2 versions then, on native hardware, the frame rate is the biggest improvement. It stutters relatively frequently on Switch 1. The Switch 1 version is a variable frame rate, constantly ramping up and down anywhere between about 30 and 60, whereas the Switch 2 version is damn near locked at 60. But if you play the Switch 1 version on the Switch 2, suddenly you have that same 60 FPS, as far as I can tell, whether you're playing the Switch 1 or Switch 2 version. The Switch 2 will run it just fine. So, assuming that you're playing on Switch 2, the frame rate isn't really an issue between either version, but the shadows are so much better on the Switch 2, and where I noticed the biggest bump in the graphics. On the Switch 1 version, they are a bit of a juddery mess, unfortunately, and all kind of jagged edges. It seems that both versions use the exact same models. I didn't notice any polycount bump with the Switch 2 version, but it runs everything at a much higher resolution, making it very noticeable, especially in the environments, especially fine details like wires, electrical cables, basically anything with thin lines. Of course, the higher resolution makes text much easier to read too, both in the HUD and menus, but also in the in-game details like signs, etc. If you're playing docked, the Switch 2 version, I think, appears to be upscaled to 4K. It looks very sharp either way. The DLSS or whatever algorithm it's using does a great job with the texture assets, including text, which is good, as from my experience with PC gaming, that often is an area where AI-style upscaling can really struggle. The load times on Switch 2 are much faster than Switch 1, appears to be about half or maybe even faster. But again, this goes for both the Switch 2 version and the Switch 1 version if you're running it on the Switch 2. So if you're going to be playing on Switch 2, both versions have this speed boost, both in frame rates and in load times. And why would you be playing a Switch 1 version on the Switch 2 if you own a Switch 2? Well, that gets to my main issue with the game, issue in inverted commas. Being this is Sega, many of you already know where this is going. The Switch 1 version comes fully on the cartridge, but the Switch 2 version is a keycard, unfortunately, and chances are that you can find the Switch 1 version cheaper as well. Also, there's no upgrade path for those that want to buy the Switch 1 version, so if you want the nicest looking and best playing version, you'll need to tolerate a keycard or digital download. But if you can tolerate the lower resolution and worse shadows, the Switch 1 version is functionally virtually identical. It will still benefit from the faster load times and frame rates, might end up being significantly cheaper, and vitally for some, it won't take up space on your system memory or memory card, won't require a large download before you can play, and, you can feel like you actually own the game. For many people, including me, that's huge. Shout to regular viewer, commenter, and lovely person Buttons and Boxes, who bought the Switch 1 version specifically for this reason, despite owning a Switch 2, and I certainly can't blame her. For me, I bought both versions to do this comparison. I must admit, having both versions once you play the Switch 2 version, it is hard to justify going back, but I do like having the Switch 1 version on the shelf and feeling like I actually paid for a real product. And honestly, if you are playing on the Switch 2 hardware, even the Switch 1 version has those fast loading times and smooth frame rate, as I've mentioned multiple times, and if you're going to be playing mostly handheld, you're only boosting the resolution from 720 to 1080 rather than 4K and docked, so the differences really come down to just the shadows and a few graphical effects, which won't be a big deal for many. So in some ways, just as with Puyo Puyo Tetris 2, the Switch 1 version actually becomes the smarter buy. This is going to become a recurring issue with Switch 2 games, I feel, sadly, but as we've discussed in a previous video, it is possible that Nintendo are changing their mind and adding more paths and options for developers, fingers crossed, so there is hope for indie devs of smaller projects wanting to release physical copies at a reasonable price, like what I am. And Sega themselves are adding an upgrade path for Sonic Cross Worlds, so maybe they'll change their mind and patch an upgrade path into Raidou, Puyo Puyo Tetris 2S, Sonic X Shadow Generations. We can only hope. If they do, I'd be far more certain in giving them my unquestioning recommendation. For now, however, be aware that if you do decide to buy the Switch 1 version and think about upgrading in the future, unfortunately, for now at least, your save game can't even be transferred. Again, I hope this is something Sega fix in the future, given that these games are functionally identical. As a dev myself, I honestly can't see any reason why this can't be patched in very easily, but as always, when reviewing a game, I can only review it for what it is now, rather than what it could become in the future. There's also Day 1 DLC, which you can get bundled with the digital deluxe version or buy separately. There is a guest demons pack with 6 new recruitable demons, skill book pack, survival pack, Kuzunoa village trainings, and the big one seems to be the Demons of the Aral Rift with exclusive trials to earn unique skills. I bought physically, and these versions just come with the base game. It bothers me that you can't buy a complete physical version, and I hate how Sega releases pretty much all its new games with tons of Day 1 DLC and deluxe content nowadays, but I don't think any of this stuff is essential to have Day 1, but if it does turn out to be one of your new favourite games, I guess it's nice that you can expand it further down the line if you want to. It would just feel a bit less cynical to me if games launched in a complete state and extra content was developed and added later, rather than having certain Day 1 content just hidden behind a paywall. Oh well. Back to the perils of modern gaming, I guess. To be fair to Sega, they have said that some free DLC will be coming further down the line, although they haven't specified what it is, but obviously that is extremely welcome, and if they plan on keeping supporting and expanding the game, that does really show how much Atlus do care about it, and goes with what I said earlier about this clearly being a loving remake rather than just a quick and dirty cash grab remaster. This game is $50 for the base version, which seems to be a standard price for Sega, and even though this is technically a remake of an old game, it's barely recognizable and a super high effort port. I'd say $50 in that situation is a very good price considering. Sure, there's that digital deluxe, which will run you $65 or $15-ish for the DLC, I believe, if you buy the boxed keycard copy. But $65 still comes in at under the $70 that many third parties are choosing to charge for similarly beefy experiences. This is a big game, and if you like RPGs, SMT, Shin Megami Tensai, detective noir, Japanese period stuff, Eastern occult, or anything along those lines, really, yeah, I can totally recommend this game. I will say, to cover all bases, that I can imagine that there will be some people who might prefer the PS2 original. I definitely don't fall into that category, especially because of the random battles. But this game does change enough about the original that it is a distinct possibility. Some might even prefer the original pre-rendered backgrounds to the modern 3D graphics, and that's certainly something I can understand. These new graphics are crisp and nicely textured and run extremely smoothly, but they are somewhat low poly and geometric, presumably to work just as well on the Switch 1 than the Switch 2, and maybe the higher resolution of the Switch 2 makes the low poly aesthetic even more obvious. So the pre-rendered versions probably do end up having a little bit more character to them. They're also more noir in feel than the more colourful modern versions. Neither is better or worse, it's just a stylistic preference. For me, though, the improved combat, voice acting, dynamic camera moves, better load times, and as I said, the lack of random battles make the new version definitely the best way to become acquainted with the world of Raidou, unless you have a specific nostalgia for the original or the aesthetic of early 2000s PS2 games. As I said, I haven't completed the game. I think I'm about halfway through, but realistically, what with DK Bananza already out and the Jamboree TV coming out any day now, realistically, if I don't review this game immediately, I won't get around to it. So I'm tentatively going to give it an 8 out of 10 review at this point in my playthrough. Let's say 82%. If the Switch 1 and Switch 2 versions were upgradable and saves were transferable, or if the Switch 2 version was a full physical release, we'd be more like 85%. I don't think it's an all-time classic, but it is an original idea, lovingly crafted, decent value, a nice story, good characters. It's not an essential purchase for everyone, but for those that are into this kind of thing, it's really, really good, and even those that don't typically play JRPGs might enjoy this given the unique story, setting and aesthetic, and real-time combat. Have you played Raidou Remastered? Are you an SMT guy, or are you a person that prefers Persona? Let me know in the comments down below. And of course, like and subscribe if you haven't already. What are you doing? Or even better, come and say hi in our exclusive free members area where you can enter our free competition to win those cool official Nintendo minifigurines and mushroom block stationery thingies. They're really cool. Go check out the photo and details at linktree/dailyswitch2 linktr.ee/dailyswitch2. It's free, you know. Why not? Thanks, friends, and I'll see you later.